Hello and welcome to this review of my Fujitsu N860-8282 or something like that. This keyboard appears to be from 1979, making it my oldest board at the moment and the only one I own from the 70s. It's also very interesting because of the switches, which are an extremely unique and quite important find, but we'll get to that in a bit. I got this from eBay off a seller from London. He wanted £50 for it, if memory serves, but that was a bit rich for my blood. So I let him relist it a few times for lower prices, and I nabbed it for £20 in the end. Now, Fujitsu are probably most well known for a slew of rubber dome keyboards they put out in vast numbers, and the Fujitsu Peerless switches they put out before that. And then last week we looked at their older leaf spring switches, which are an extremely well designed linear switch. Check out the link in the description for that one. But this week we look at the switches the leaf springs replaced, the even older Fujitsu magnetic reeds. A reed switch is essentially an open contact sealed in a little glass bubble filled with inert gas. The idea is that when you have a magnet nearby, it's going to magnetize the wires to either repel each other or in this case attract each other, closing a circuit. The inert atmosphere of the glass bubble protects the circuit, giving it a higher expected lifetime than other contact-based switches such as Cherry Max and Alps, which have a lifetime of about 20 million operations. The lifetime of reed switches depends strongly on the voltage used, but for the tiny voltages used in keyboards, the lifetime of reed switches will be somewhere in the billions. Yes, that's billions, with a B, for billions. Also, because the magnet is moved next to the reed without actually contacting it, there is no friction between the slider and the rest of the switch, so they are extremely smooth. Last week's leaf spring switches were already outstanding, but this is just effortless, partly also because they're extremely light, possibly as low as 35 grams of force. If you ever wondered what Cherry MX Red should feel like, get a board with these in. Seriously, it will blow your mind. Now, these switches are linear, as with all magnetic reed switches. Or are they? See, when I got it, I noticed the alpha keys felt quite different, stiffer, and there was some resistance in the key feel, as if it were tactile. But tactile magnetic reeds have never been reported, so I thought maybe the switches on the alpha block were just really dirty or well used or something. But it was too consistent, and I noticed that the switch housings had different numbers on them. So I desoldered two switches and opened them, and guess what I found? Ta-da! It's a tactile leaf spring. Now that's a very interesting find, because before this it was assumed that Alps Electric invented the use of leaf springs to generate tactility, somewhere in the mid-80s, but apparently Fujitsu beat them by several years. Look how much bigger it is than Alps Leaf 2, it's enormous. And the leaf has a much sharper tooth angle than the Alps Leaf 2, and it's thicker. All this boils down to a very sudden tactile bump, which frankly feels quite rough, especially compared to the infinity smoothness of the linear switches. I'll be honest, at first I didn't really like these. The sharp tactile tooth made it feel like the slider caught onto it too much, especially on the way back up. But over time I found myself wanting to play around with this keyboard and its switches more and more, and I've really warmed up to them. I think I'd enjoy them a lot now. Anyway, if I wanted, I could take all the tactile leaves out and make them linear, but I think they're pretty cool like this. Also, the noise. It's a good noise. By the way, you hear that slight clicky noise that's almost like a tiny squeak? That's not friction, all magnetic reed switches have it. It's caused by the contacts in the reed releasing when you let go of a key. When they snap together, it makes very little noise, so even though it might sound like the switches are in pain, they're in fact just doing their job. The level of noise differs from type to type. Other manufacturers like Honeywell and ASM also make magnetic reed switches, and they sound quite different. They also have a completely different internal structure, even though they work in exactly the same way. With the inherent clicky noise generated by the reed, these switches are about as close as you come to a clicky linear switch, whereas all other clicky switches are also tactile, not linear. They're not really clicky though, they just happen to have a fairly audible mode of operation. On the inside of the Fujitsu switches there is a little rubber cushion to dampen the impact of the slider, by the way, so that bottoming out isn't too loud and doesn't feel too harsh. Very thoughtful. The switches come with various different sliders. Most come with this archetypal cross-mount pole slider, but some others, especially the big ones, come with this bizarre two-prong slider, like this. And the ones with integrated LEDs have the two-prong slider and the piece on top of that, which holds the diode, as well as two metal ribbons that go through the middle of the switch, which seems very elaborate. But it does have the advantage that the LED moves along with the keycap, so it's always bright and visible, even when it's unpressed. Just like with last week's board, they didn't bother with stabilizers on anything except the spacebar, so the only thing that's holding the colossal enter key in place is just the switch slider. The keys on this keyboard are much better stabilized though, possibly because it hasn't been used quite as extensively. Now, I have no idea what computer this came from, and I don't know if it originally had a separate casing, but even without any casing, it weighs over 1.5 kilos. It's got a metal mounting plate of rather insane thickness, and it's actually pillared to the PCB to keep it nice and in place. The board had N-key rollover as well, as you can see from the diodes soldered in above every switch. And here's the model sticker of the keyboard, now that we're on the reverse side anyway. Finally, there's this red grounding sticker. This is a fairly decent giveaway for Fujitsu magnetic reed switches. Until a while ago, it was thought that only boards with these switches had this sticker, but it's since been proven that some Fujitsu Leaf spring boards also had it. The keycaps are massive, virtually solid ABS plastic with beautiful double-shot lettering. They have the same super thick walls as last week's boards and an extremely tightly fitting insert inside. Cherry MX keycaps fit on the magnetic reeds, but not the other way around, which is a shame because that would have been awesome. The mount is an incredibly tight fit though. Even with wire pullers it's very hard to do, but I would recommend you wouldn't, regardless, because the fit is so tight you'll almost certainly crack the cap, as I did with 2 of them. Here you can see one of the fractures. Considering how thick these are, I guess you can see how much force you need to pull these off, so I wouldn't recommend it if you could at all avoid it. By the way, the Alpha keycaps are very similar to the ones on the Sanyo I reviewed last week, both of which look quite different from the more standard Fujitsu double shots. They're very deeply sculpted and spherical, which is an instant ticket to super retro. Nothing quite says old keyboard like spherical keycaps. In conclusion, this board is great fun. Although it took me a while to get into the key feel on their tactile switches, they've really grown on me over time. Also, the linear switches are abnormally smooth. They're pretty amazing, if extremely light. And of course, it's a nice piece of history, proof that tactile magnetic reed switches existed, and that Fujitsu invented the Tactile Leaf. That's it for this review. Thank you for watching, I hope you enjoyed it, and following is a typing demonstration of me typing on this keyboard.